I'm Nathaniel Stinnett. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder and executive director of the Environmental Voter Project, and I'm really excited for our time together this evening. That being said, I do think it's important to start by mentioning one thing in particular, and that is we are obviously living through a frightening moment in time when our democracy crisis and our climate crisis seem to be spinning out of control. And in the face of stuff like that, let's be honest, it can seem weird to uh, talk about our accomplishments. It can seem weird to look back at the last election and talk about the things that went right, an election that many of us would prefer to just put behind us. But one unavoidable truth is that what we need now more than ever is more political power, period. And the only way we're going to be able to get more political power is by taking a hard, scientifically rigorous look at what works and what doesn't work so that we can plan a future that will help us build more of that political power. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Here we go. And as I think many of you know, I always like to have a table of contents here. I always like to let folks know what they're going to get. First, I am going to give a very, very brief introduction to the Environmental Voter Project. For those of you who are new to our work, please forgive me. This is not an introduction to EVP webinar. I will give a quick skim over what we do and how we do it, but that's it. Then we're going to go into some of the newer data, because data has been flowing in for the past 5 months that we've gotten on what climate voters did and didn't do in November 2024. Then we're going to get a little bit more into our results and do a really deep dive on how the Environmental Voter Project did, including our cumulative results. And then we're going to get a sneak peek at what's coming over the next 8-9 months. As Peter mentioned at the beginning, you can ask questions in the Q&A folder. Peter will answer many of them, but if he doesn't answer your question, that might be because he's holding it for the end to ask me. So, without further ado, I'm going to jump into things, but I do just want to say one more thing. Sorry. I want to deeply thank our thousands of volunteers. We had more than 4,400 unique volunteers last year. Unique volunteers. We had over 11,000 donors. We have some amazing organizational partners. We partnered with over 40 groups last year. No one wants me to name them all right now, so I won't do it. But we are all deeply grateful for our relationships with all of you. And I think many of you have worked with our amazing volunteer phone bank leaders and canvassing leaders, and they deserve an enormous amount of gratitude as well. We got a lot of great results last year, and I hope all of you take pride in those results, despite all this awful stuff that we're living through right now. All right, let's jump into things. A brief introduction to the Environmental Voter Project. For those of you who don't know our work, we are laser focused on what you see right here. We identify people who care deeply about climate and the environment who don't vote, and then we turn them into better voters. That's it. That's it. We don't lobby for particular policies. We don't endorse candidates. We don't even try to convince people to care more about climate change or the environment. In fact, a good way to think about us is we're not in the mind-changing business or the habit-changing business at all. Instead, we're solely in the behavior-changing business. Changing people's behavior is so much easier and cheaper than changing their opinions and changing their minds, especially about something like climate change. And so What we are doing is we're laser focused on finding people who don't need their minds changed. They just need their behavior changed. So we find those non-voting environmentalists and turn them into better voters. Yes, Peter.
Nathaniel, I'm getting some feedback from folks that the volume coming from your end is a little more muted than from my end. So if there's a way for you to move the mic a little closer, that'd be great.
Great. That is very good to know. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. I'm going to go to audio here. And thank you, everybody, for telling me this. I'm going to go to audio settings. How does that sound? Any better? Hopefully that sounds better, folks.
It's sounding louder to me.
Outstanding. Thank you, everybody, for letting us know. Okay. Here we go. We do this with a four-step process. First, we work with data scientists to build predictive models that allow us to individually identify people who care deeply about climate and the environment, yet we can see on public voter files that they're not voting. Now, I know that seems a little complicated, and believe me, it's something that I've given 90-minute seminars on, and we're not going to spend time on it today. But if you're interested in learning more about how we identify people who list climate or the environment as their number one priority, Peter can share some links with you in the chat. We have some mini briefings where in a really short bit, 9 or 10 minutes, you can learn about how we individually identify these climate first and environment first voters on voter files. But once we find them and we isolate the ones who don't vote or infrequently vote, and we don't need fancy data scientists for that, that's public record whether you vote or not. Once we do that, we can then move to step 2, mobilization. And now we have the luxury of communicating with a whole universe of people without having to change their minds, without having to change their opinions. All we need to do is change their behavior. And so what we do is we run dozens of randomized control trials each year, these very sophisticated experiments that we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, that help us isolate which messages work best with which of these low propensity environmental voters over which media. And all of our messages are just focused on one thing and one thing only, and that is how do we get non-voters to vote for the first time, and how do we get infrequent voters to become consistent voters? Step 3, habit reinforcement. Ultimately, what we are trying to do at the Environmental Voter Project is dramatically increase the number of consistent climate-first voters. And in order to do that, you need to work year-round. At EVP, we live behavioral science. Many of you don't, thankfully. But even then, you can probably intuitively understand that if you're trying to change someone's habits, you can't just talk to them once every 2 or 4 years when there's a big federal election going on. No, you need to talk to them as often as possible, and that's the approach that we take. At EVP, this year in 2025, we're going to be active in over 400 elections. Seriously, 400. And here's a secret. Most of them aren't that important for environmental policymaking. I freely admit that. But every single one of them is crucially important for changing people's voting habits. If you are in the behavior changing business and you're trying to get people to vote consistently, you got to use every single election as a behavioral intervention opportunity. And that's what we do. Because ultimately our goal is step 4, which is to change the electorate. At EVP, our theory of change does not rely on lobbying someone until they change their mind and decide to do the right thing. Lobbying's important, but boy, is it hard. Nor does it rely on politicians suddenly believing in physics or accepting science. No, what we rely on is basic political power. We think that there is nothing that motivates a politician more than the prospect of winning or losing an election. And so, what our job is to make it as hard as possible for any politician to run and win an election without leading on climate. And the only way that's going to happen is by dramatically increasing the number of climate voters, not non-voters, but voters, because politicians always go where the votes are. And I know that sounds cynical, but it's just the brutal arithmetic of how democracy works. You go to where the votes are, or you don't get to be a politician. So that's why we do what we do at the Environmental Voter Project. I told you it was going to be a very brief introduction, and it was. If you want more information about how we do what we do and why we do it, you can go to environmentalvoter.org/about. We've got a whole bunch of information there. And you can also, as I mentioned earlier, see some of those very short mini briefing videos that go into detail on all of these topics. All right. Now we are going to get into the climate vote in 2024. As I think many of you know, data trickles in for months after an election. First of all, it often takes 3, 4, even 5 weeks to count all the votes. So exit polling data is always being updated based on those changing assumptions of who voted and how many people voted where. Then, at different times, different states update their voter files and release data on which individuals actually voted and which individuals didn't actually vote. And as you can imagine, that is a really rich, important data set, because then not only can groups like us see if our targets voted and if people in our control group voted or things like that, but we can figure out which types of people voted and which types of people stayed home and not have to rely on exit polls, which are not always reliable. So this is now our best, most accurate picture of what the 2024 election looked like for the climate movement. First, when asked what their number one most important issue was, actual voters, 7% of them listed climate change. Now, that was up from 4% 4 years ago. But we got to be honest with ourselves, folks. 7% ain't enough. 7% is nowhere near where we need it to be. Think back to September or October of last year, when there are so many stories about how Kamala Harris's campaign felt like they had to talk about immigration. They didn't necessarily want to. They knew it wasn't their strongest foot forward, but they felt like they had to because it was so deeply important to such a large block of voters. That's where we need climate change to be. We need there to be so many voters who care deeply about climate and the environment that politicians have no choice but to confront the issue. That's how real change happens. When you dig further into these now final exit polls, because we know who voted and who didn't vote, and you divide it up by these groups, these issue groupings, people who told us what their number one issue priority was people who voted for Donald Trump, or I'm sorry, people who said immigration was their number one issue, voted for Donald Trump by an 8.9 to 1 margin. So that was his strongest issue area. On the Harris campaign side, it was climate change. People who listed climate change as their number one priority broke harder for Kamala Harris than any other issue constituency group, and it wasn't that close. In fact, if you drill down to specific states, especially some swing states, and I'm just going to take North Carolina here tonight because I know that Peter, who's here, is in North Carolina. If you look at North Carolina, People who listed climate change as their number one priority broke for Kamala Harris at a 48-1 margin, which was even more than registered Democrats broke for Kamala Harris. I'll say that again. In North Carolina and many other swing states, if you look at exit polling data, people who listed climate as their number one priority broke harder for Kamala Harris than even Democrats did. It's interesting. It's interesting. Unfortunately, the reason the Environmental Voter Project exists, which is to build political power for the climate movement, and to do it by finding all these people who care about climate who aren't voting and getting them into the electorate, well, unfortunately, that problem we're trying to solve, that opportunity we're trying to take advantage of, still exists. When we looked at our 21 states worth of data, and we saw all the people who we had individually identified as being really likely to list climate as their top priority, and then all the voter files were updated and we could see which of them voted and which of them didn't vote, we could then extrapolate from that to all 50 states. So this is an estimate, but it's an estimate based off a whole bunch of data, like 110, 120 million voters worth of data in 19 states. And it's a pretty good estimate that 11.2 million already registered voters who are likely to list climate and the environment as their number one priority just stayed home and didn't vote. 11.2 million. 11.2 million. That's a lot of missing climate voters. And it was a larger number than we saw 4 years ago. But as frustrating as that is, it remains an enormous opportunity. And just to give you an example, if you look at these 5 swing states, these happen to be the 5 of the 7 major swing states where EVP worked. In every single one of them, the number of environmentalists who stayed home and didn't vote was larger than Trump's margin of victory in that state. I'll say that again. See all these green bars? That's the number of already registered to vote voters who are likely to list climate or the environment as their number one priority who did not cast a ballot in November of 2024. The red bars, that's Donald Trump's margin of victory in that state. This is the enormous opportunity that is sitting there for the climate movement. And I know it's frustrating to many people. Believe me, it's frustrating to me too, that there are millions, literally tens of millions of already registered non-voting environmentalists out there. But as I will prove to you over the next 10, 15 minutes, we have gotten extraordinarily good at getting these people to vote. Now, do we have more work to do? Yeah. This chart tells you just exactly how much work we've got to do. But oh my God, are we getting good at it? And I can't wait to share these results with you. As a reminder, through last year, we were active in 19 states. We're now active in 21. We recently expanded into 2 more, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But through last year, we were active in 19 states. Throughout 2024, we contacted 3.9 million unique voters. Now, many of them we contacted multiple times, but 3.9 million unique voters, and we did so over 214 different elections. Because remember, we are trying to make consistent, habitual climate voters here. Moreover, the best way to get someone to vote in the really big elections that take place in November is often to start talking to them in the smaller elections in January and February and March. And so we took all of these elections very, very seriously. We ended up being able to communicate with an enormous number of people in an enormous number of ways. And many of you volunteers who are on the call right now, gosh, I see hundreds of you. This is an incredible crowd. You should all be really, really proud of these numbers. We ended up making almost 9 million phone calls. That's not what's important, though. Obviously, a phone ringing doesn't turn someone into a voter. What turns someone into a voter is a conversation. And we had over 260,000 of them. It's just a huge number, a huge number. 260,000 conversations with our targeted voters. We had over 560 canvassers canvass over 13,000 voters in our 4 canvassing hubs. That's Tucson, Austin, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. Our volunteer postcarders did extraordinary work, delivering over 430,000 handwritten postcards to our target voters. We sent 2.5 million pieces of direct mail from the Environmental Voter Project. This is the staff doing these mail campaigns, and staff also ran a very big, sophisticated digital ad campaign with video ads and static display ads, where we weren't able to deliver ads to all 3.9 million of our targets. We were able to match about 3.7 million of them online, so we did pretty darn good. And on average, each of those 3.7 million saw our ads 10 times. It was a really, really robust campaign. But as wonderful as these big numbers are, as I think many of you know, the Environmental Voter Project takes a different approach to measuring our impact. Yes, we are very proud of the number of voters we reached, and we're very proud of all the stuff we threw at those voters. But at the end of the day, all that effort doesn't matter unless we got someone to vote. Moreover, I would claim, it doesn't really matter unless we got someone to vote who otherwise would not have voted. And this is part of what makes the Environmental Voter Project so unique. We take a very scientifically rigorous approach to trying to figure out that precise impact. How many people, how many of these low propensity environmental voters did we get to vote who otherwise would not have voted? This is how we are able to do that. We submit our work to randomized control trials. And very briefly, this is how they work. First, we identify this group of low propensity climate voters, these climate voters who are unlikely to vote. And before we send a single canvasser, or before we call them or send them any mail or digital ads, before we talk to them at all, we randomly separate that group into 2 groups. One is a treatment group, and the other is a control group. That control group we set aside, and we never talk to them. We never talk to them. Usually that control group is about 15% of the original population. All right, then the treatment group gets all of our messaging. They're the ones we canvass and call and mail and send digital ads to and postcards, all with our souped up behavioral science informed messaging. The control group, nothing. They're over on the shelf, not getting anything from us. Then election day happens. And remember what I alluded to before. Whether you vote or not is public record. And after election day, in some states it takes a month, in some states it takes 4 months. But after election day, public voter files are updated, and we can see how many people voted in our treatment group. These are the people who got our messaging, and compare that to how many people voted in our control group of low propensity environmental voters, people who we did not message to. And as long as that initial separation process is truly random, and as long as these numbers of our targets are big enough that we can get what's called statistical significance, it essentially means we can eliminate the likelihood of random outcomes. Well, what this process allows us to do is isolate what our sole impact was on turnout while controlling for all outside variables. Let's say it rains in Pittsburgh and that depresses turnout. Well, there's roughly the same percentage of Pittsburgh voters in our treatment group as there are in our control group. We controlled for that. Or let's say the Harris campaign spends $2 billion in Pennsylvania mobilizing climate voters. Well, we controlled for that too. Unless they hack into our system, decide to talk to only people in our treatment group and nobody in our control group, well, anybody who other campaigns are talking to are approximately the same percentage of voters in our treatment group as in our control group. And what's great about these randomized control trials is, as I said before, we can isolate what we were solely responsible for. Now, we're just going to look back at the last 4 years and obviously really narrow in on last year. But I want to be clear. We likely increased turnout in probably 400 or 500 elections over the last 4 years. But likely isn't good enough. We don't report results unless we can say with at least 95% certainty that any increase in turnout in our treatment group was solely due to our intervention and not due to random occurrence. This is what's called statistically significant results. There are many elections where turnout in our treatment group is much higher than our control group. But because it was a really small election, we don't get that certainty, and we can't tell you, we don't know if this is due to random occurrence or not. So what you are about to see is the stuff where we are confident that we were solely responsible for boosting turnout while controlling for all outside variables. And you can see in 2021, in 2022, 2023, and yes, last year in 2024, when almost $16 billion were spent and we had close to record high turnout, we have been solely responsible for extraordinary results. We have increased turnout by as much as 5.7 percentage points in local elections. We have been solely responsible for increasing turnout by as much as 3.8 percentage points in statewide elections that aren't a presidential general. And yes, in last year's presidential general election, we increased turnout by as much as 1.8 percentage points in a state. And as you can see, we were solely responsible and we were able to identify what our sole impact was on turnout in many states last fall. Focusing in on 2024, these were the elections where we could tell beyond a shadow of a doubt that we were solely responsible for increasing turnout. As far as the presidential general election, there were many states that aren't on this list. States where turnout of the voters we contacted was much higher than in our control group. States like Alaska, New Hampshire, Louisiana were all well beyond 1 percentage point increase in turnout. But because those states are small, we can't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that that increase in turnout was solely due to us. We probably increased turnout in all of our states. But in these 5, Georgia, Nebraska, North Carolina, Texas, we can say that the Environmental Voter Project, all of you volunteers, all of you donors, were solely responsible for increasing turnout by as much as 1.8 percentage points. And let's even take some of the smaller stuff. Georgia, a very important swing state. We were targeting almost 500,000 voters in Georgia. That means that the Environmental Voter Project was solely responsible for getting 2,000 people to show up who otherwise would have stayed home. Now, was that a difference maker? No, of course it wasn't. We are all deeply aware of that. But what you should also be deeply aware of is this. This is my favorite chart tonight. I know to many of you it looks like the Japanese flag. It is not the Japanese flag. This, believe it or not, is a pie chart. It's a pie chart of all the money that was spent in 2024, $15.9 billion were spent last cycle. Environmental Voter Project spent $4 million. That teeny tiny slice, you see that little yellow line? That's our slice of the pie. We were nothing compared to the 16 billion with a B dollars that were spent. Yet, we can prove through randomized control trials that we had a real impact on turnout. And these numbers, man, in politics, 0.5 percentage point is everything, let alone 1.5 percentage points. You should all feel extraordinarily good about this. Now, as far as the other states you don't see on here, Pennsylvania, Arizona, things like that, we may have increased turnout there too. We probably did. Can we prove it with absolute certainty? No. But with these ones we can, even amidst all of this absurd amount of spending. And that's something you should all feel really, really proud of. All right. That is the first way that we measure our impact at the Environmental Voter Project, through running randomized control trials and looking at these specific elections. Now let's look at the second way. We measure our long-term impact because, again, remember, our goal is to build long-term political power by creating more and more habitual voters each year. And the way that we measure this impact is, remember, whether you vote or not is public record. And so we are always tracking who is likely to vote and who is unlikely to vote. We target these individual low propensity environmental voters. And we mobilize them. We mobilized them last fall. We've been mobilizing many of them already this year. We continue to mobilize these people throughout time, and we tag them in our database, and we track them. And we track them over multiple elections, seeing who votes and who doesn't vote. And we only stop when they become consistent voters. And here's the incredible thing. We have now gotten to a point where at the Environmental Voter Project, we have communicated with almost 12.8 million unique individual voters. 12.8 million. Since we launched in one teeny little city in Boston back in 2015, we have now expanded to the point where we have contacted almost 12.8 million unique low propensity environmental voters. And remember, if we're talking to them, it's because they are awful voters. And as of about 3 weeks ago, we could see in their public voting histories that almost 2.2 million of them had become such consistent voters that they now pretty much vote in every election, no matter how small. It could be a library trustee election and they're showing up. This is the metric of which we are most proud, and is the metric of which all of you should be the most proud. Now, I want to be clear. This is different from the previous metric, the randomized control trial. Unlike the randomized control trial, where we can say, yep, we're solely responsible for that, for this, we cannot claim that we are solely responsible for turning 2.2 million non-voters into super voters. But man, we are pretty darn responsible. There's no other organization that has now been active in over 2,200 elections since 2015. That's right, 2,200 elections, working year in, year out to change voter behavior. And as you can see in those state-specific numbers, we're doing it in some states where it can really make a difference. Let's take Georgia, for example. There are now over 117,000 consistently voting super voters who list climate as their #1 priority, who used to be awful voters. And as we head into what will likely be the tightest US Senate race in 2026, man, having those 117,000 brand new super voters there is going to be pretty darn nice. Maine, probably going to be the second most, maybe the third closest US Senate election. We've only been there since 2019. We've helped make almost 31,000 consistently voting environmentalists. And just to give you some more context for some of these numbers that you're seeing here, over 380,000 of the low propensity environmental voters we've been communicating with over the years in Pennsylvania are now consistent super voters. What does a number like that mean in Pennsylvania? Well, in 2022, the US Senate margin was only 263,000. Last fall, the US Senate margin was 15,000. Virginia, we've got another Virginia gubernatorial election coming up in, 8 months? 9 months? Well, 4 years ago, the margin in that race was 63,000 votes. Whereas EVP has helped create over 230,000 consistently voting environmentalists in Virginia. And you can see in Arizona and Nevada as well, these numbers really add up. And this is what I want to stress to you. Not only should all of you, our incredible volunteers and our incredible donors, feel extraordinarily good about our election-specific results, but you should also realize that all of the small elections that lead towards these environmentalists becoming consistent voters is like an investment that continues to give you a return year after year, election after election, long after we've stopped talking to them. Because once they become consistent voters, we don't have to mobilize them anymore. They don't need a voter turnout group. Yet, you and us were responsible for turning them into those super voters, or at least partially responsible. And that's something we should all feel very, very proud of. All right, so what are some takeaways? And don't worry, we're going to have more message experiment webinars to go into specific messages and specific communication pieces throughout the year. But what are some takeaways that we have from all this data that we've been going through? Well, first off, phone banks work. I know that's strange. I know people think, who the hell picks up their phone these days? But they work. Just in 2023 and 2024, we had 9 separate randomized control trials where we were only doing volunteer calls that had statistically significant results boosting turnout. Phone banks work. They work. If you have the right messaging, they work. And boy, are they easy to scale. Another thing, our canvassing program is getting great results. Where we have volume, we are also getting statistically significant boosts in turnout, and pretty big ones, because canvassing remains the single most effective way to increase turnout. So it has the highest ceiling. But boy, is it hard to scale. At least it's hard to scale efficiently. And that's something we continue to struggle with at EVP. We get great results with our canvassing, but the only easy way to scale it would be to become a very inefficient organization and hire an absurd number of people and open offices everywhere and things like that. We don't think we're going to go that route, but we are mindful of the fact that we're getting great results, but not scaling our canvassing as quickly as we'd like to. Volunteer postcarding. What have we learned here? We think we're doing this the right way. I have an enormous amount of respect for a lot of the other postcarding and letter writing groups out there. And boy, am I glad that they exist. As many of you know, EVP does things differently. We design the postcards. We tell you what to write. We print the postcards and we mail them to you, often providing stamps, and let you know exactly when to send them. We are very rigorous with our design and our messaging and our training. We don't let anybody send postcards unless they've attended one of our trainings. And what we know is this has led to consistent, statistically significant boosts in turnout in our randomized control trials. It works. Is it a little bit harder to scale? Yeah, we're not sending out millions of postcards because we're making it hard. We're making it hard. But it works. It works. Direct mail consistently gets great results. Moreover, when we looked at all of our elections, not just this past year, but over multiple years, there's a pretty simple and obvious correlation that just jumps off the charts. And that's more direct mail equals more votes. And as the head of an environmental nonprofit, I wish that weren't the case. I wish we weren't sending dead trees to people in order to get them to vote. But you're damn right I'm going to do it because it works really, really well. And what we need in the environmental movement more than anything right now is political power. And you want to know how easy it is to scale a direct mail operation? I type an extra 0 on my keyboard and hit return. That's it. All we need is more money. Direct mail is working so well. Finally, digital ads are working. Some of them are working, some of them weren't getting good results. And this is something we are going to try to test more. As you can imagine, you can fit a lot of creative variables even into a 6-second ad, let alone a 15-second one. And sometimes, if an ad works, it's hard to tell which of those creative variables led to the increase in turnout. Now, we can do more experiments than most people because we're active in hundreds of elections this year, or every year, and this is one of the things we're going to be experimenting with a lot. We know that many of our digital ads are working. We're less confident in why they are working. And so this is just something that we really, really want to get smart about. All right, so where does that leave us? Where does that leave us? First, we now have a 9-year track record of proven results. And not just proven results, but proven results in all types of elections, local, state, and federal, using all types of voter contact. We have proven results in phone calls, postcards, canvassing, direct mail, digital ads. It works. No matter what election we do it in, no matter how we're doing it, it works. Moreover, we have proven that we can scale and have it still work. 9 years ago, we started a small proof of concept in Boston. 7 years ago, we started expanding to a second state, and then to 4 more, and then more and more, and now we're in 21 states. And as we have done that, not only have we not gotten less effective, not only have we not flatlined, we have gotten better. We have gotten consistently better results as we have gotten bigger and reached out to more voters. Moreover, we have stayed extraordinarily efficient. Ever since 2017, when our pilot program was over, every single year, we have spent more than 90% of our expenditures on program services. So that's identifying or mobilizing voters. So another way of putting that is every single year, less than 10% of our expenditures, less than 10% of our time and our money goes to fundraising and general admin. It's enormously efficient. And we still have room to grow, enormous room to grow. Last year, we were able to spend $4 million. Looking at all of our experiments, we calculated that we probably could have spent as much as 3 times as much before even reaching a point of diminishing returns, before we even started creating fewer new voters per dollar spent. And so now we are in this very frightening moment that we discussed at the beginning of this presentation, when we all know that we need to dramatically and quickly build political power. And so I want to tell you, we are now in 21 states. As many of you know, we recently expanded into New Jersey and Michigan. We built all new predictive models identifying these climate first voters, as precise as you can get. We will be targeting over 7.5 million voters this year. We probably won't be able to communicate with all of them, but we're probably going to reach at least 5 or 6 million of them, all of whom are already registered to vote, highly likely to list climate or the environment as their #1 priority. And when you look at their public voting history, they are unlikely to vote in this year's elections. just to give you a sense of some of the elections that are coming up. We've got big city mayoral elections in San Antonio, New York, and Boston. We've got mayoral elections in swing states like Nebraska and Pennsylvania and Michigan. We've got obviously the two big gubernatorial elections coming up in New Jersey and Virginia. We also, for those of us in the climate and environmental movement, we've got two public service commission seats in Georgia. These are statewide seats elected to the board that regulates utilities. Oh my God, is this a high leverage play for those of us in the climate movement? And there are literally hundreds of others. Hundreds of others. So we are going to be working year-round this year in hundreds of elections, phone banking, postcarding, canvassing, running these digital ad and direct mail campaigns. We want you to be a part of it. Just to give you an example of how much stuff we're doing and how many opportunities we have for you, this is just what April looks like. We've got phone banks almost every day, and look at Earth Week. We literally have a phone bank every day for Earth Week. And maybe in the chat, you can find a link to sign up for some of those phone banks. And respectfully, I want to suggest to you that this is your opportunity. We are all looking for something to do. We are all looking for a way to fight back right now. And we have proven that we can dramatically increase turnout among this group of people who need to show up for our values. So there are 4 things that you can do. 1, donate to support our work. Donate generously. A few days ago, a donor told us that they will match all donations made in April up to a total of $100,000. So if tonight you want to donate $20,000, it will be matched. If you want to donate $5, it will be matched. Peter's going to put a donation link in the chat right now. Click on it and donate. We're not asking for your charity. We are asking you to recognize an opportunity that my guess is you've been looking for. And that is, oh my God, how do I fight back against all this awful stuff that is happening? Well, we know how to turn these non-voters into new voters, and we've got hundreds of elections going on to do it in. You can join our team of monthly donors. Again, there will be a link in the chat where you can sign up for recurring monthly donations. This is a lot easier for a lot of people if you want to spread out your donations over time, and it's great for us because it helps us budget ahead. You can host your own Introduction to the Environmental Voter Project event. If you would like me to come and meet with some of your friends and colleagues and tell them about our work, boy, would I love to do that. You can email us at info@environmentalvoter.org. And finally, volunteer. Volunteer consistently. I guarantee you, whenever you sit up and you think, man, I want to do something, we have an opportunity waiting for you on our website. And once you get trained, especially on phone banking, you can call our voters whenever you want. So please, you are looking for a way to fight back. We've got proven results. This is something you can invest in. Thank you all so, so much for helping us get literally our best results ever last year. I know it wasn't what we wanted ultimately, but we have proven that all of this stuff works, and it works extraordinarily well, and we're getting better and better each year. So I'm going to take questions now, but while we're doing that, please go to those links in the chat. Donate generously and get it matched while we've got these matching funds. All right, Peter, what do we got for questions?
A lot of questions.
Okay.
Folks have been active. This is great. I'm just a little bit more than whelmed on answering them. So Nick asks, does EVP use different criteria for deciding which identified voters are more receptive to particular media, like phone calls, postcards, or letters, and therefore do the mailing and phone lists we work with reflect those differences?
Great question, Nick. Yes. Yes. It just so happened that the person who asked that question, Peter, is the guy who digs into all of this data. And when we run these randomized control trials, we're not just trying to ascertain how much we can increase turnout by sending this message to this type of person. We're also figuring out which subgroups it does best in. And so a perfect example is if you're a postcarding volunteer, you don't necessarily know this, but you might only be sending postcards to people who are above a certain age. Or if you're making phone calls, you might only be making phone calls to people who we think are more likely to answer the phone at that time of day. We absolutely optimize our messaging to different demographic subgroups. And many times our volunteers don't realize that they're not just going after all the people we've identified in a state. They're going after the people who we have seen in our data are optimized to receive this messaging at that moment in time over that communication method. So really, really good question, Nick.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, I have to say this is the first webinar we haven't been asked about why we haven't expanded into uh, Wisconsin. But that being said, there were a couple questions, including one from Charles, who said, I'm in Oklahoma, one of the redder of the red states. How do I help to get EVP active here? But other questions have been kind of along the same line, like why do we go where we go, and can we go somewhere else?
Great, great questions. I'll pull up the map just so you all can see our states again. Thank you, Charles, and others for asking this. These are the criteria we use to decide where to work. First, where is there a disproportionately large population of non-voting environmentalists? That is the most important criteria. If there aren't a lot of targets for us to turn from non-voters into new voters into consistent voters in a state, it kind of doesn't matter how good we are. We're not going to start changing policymaking. And so I won't pick on a particular state, but let's say there's a state that only has 20 non-voting environmentalists. Well, who cares if we get them all to vote? That doesn't do anything. And so the first thing that all these states have in common is they have disproportionately large populations of non-voting environmentalists. That is the reason why we've never gone into Wisconsin. Obviously, Wisconsin is a supremely important state, but there aren't that many non-voting environmentalists. It's better if your efforts and your money and your time go to other groups that are working in Wisconsin. They're going to get better results than we do. But in these states, we're going to get awesome results. Second criteria we use, repetition matters. It matters. No matter how clever we think we are, the more bites at the apple we get, the more times we can communicate with a voter, the better chances we've got in turning them into a consistent voter. So the second criteria is we like to work in states that have lots of elections, not just in even years, but odd years, so we can get all those bites at the apple. Third criteria is we don't just care about changing climate policy on the federal level. We also care about changing it on the state and local level. And so we are in places like Louisiana that have very, very high leverage local climate policy making opportunities, or Nebraska, where there are publicly owned utilities. Man, you change the makeup of one of those small local utility boards and you can shut down a coal-fired power plant. And as I mentioned earlier, New York City, largest city in the country, has a mayoral election coming up in a few months. You better believe that whoever the next mayor of New York City is, they're going to have a huge amount of potential power when it comes to leading on climate. So those are the criteria we use and why we're in these existing states. Charles, thank you for asking about Oklahoma. Other people, thank you for asking about about other states. Right now, these are the states we are focusing on. We just did a huge 50-state analysis and decided to expand into New Jersey and Michigan. I'll be honest, we're not going to expand into additional states this year. In future years, might we? Yes, but we need to have the money to do it really, really well. And as I just finished explaining, we know we can get so much more out of these states. We could quadruple our budget without any loss in effectiveness and efficiency. And so we really, really don't want to expand further unless we're confident that we have the financial support to do it. But great, great questions. We have time
Okay,
for one
so
more? Yep.
yeah, I think we do.
Okay.
So, gosh, there's so many good questions, folks. I'm sorry we can't get to more. Nathaniel, if you could close out with what should folks do this year? What are we going to be targeting? What are the most important efforts that folks can help out with at EVP?
Yeah. So the first thing that I just want to stress, and this is something that applies not just to EVP, as someone who lives the behavioral science of voting, and as someone who is involved in hundreds of elections each year, I need you to understand that you don't need to wait until this fall to have an impact on this fall's elections. Oh my God, can you have an enormous impact right now? So, whether it is with EVP, and we've got opportunities almost every single day of the week from here on out until the end of the year, seriously, or whether it's with a campaign or another organization, start now. Start now. You absolutely can increase someone's likelihood of voting this spring or summer or fall by talking to them now. Moreover, I'll now say for the fourth time tonight, remember that whether you vote or not is public record. And so if you get someone to vote for the very first time in like their local election this April or May, it only takes a few months for the record of them having voted to show up in public voter files. And then everybody who's running in general elections this fall or next year sees that and they say, holy moly, let's go get that person. You have now sent a signal to the rest of the marketplace telling them, hey, this person's a new voter. And in particular for EVP, we've got some really, really big opportunities coming up. San Antonio, I believe, is now the sixth largest city in the country. It passed Philadelphia. They have an open mayoral election coming up on May 3rd. New York City has their mayoral primary coming up in June. These are really, really important elections. Omaha, Nebraska has their mayoral coming up. All of these are just in the next few months. You can go to our website. You can go to the Get Involved page. I know Peter just put it in the chat there. And you can sign up to volunteer. Finally, what I'll just say, because it's now 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific, and we don't want to keep you later than you expected, is you can donate. And I know when the head of a nonprofit says like, hey, you can donate, like, well, of course he's going to say that. But guys, if this isn't the moment you have been waiting for, I don't know what you're waiting for. We all know what's going on out there. And the greatest single point of leverage we all have right now is political power. It's all about politics. And I know that feels weird and icky. We're not used to progressives talking about the importance of getting power, but it's all about political power now. It's all about political power. And we can't afford to wait for the 26 midterms. We can't even afford to wait for this fall. We need to fight in every election possible starting now. And we are doing that. We're going to be active in 400 elections this year. And so please do yourself a favor. Don't do it for me. Don't do it for Peter. Don't do it because you like the Environmental Voter Project. Do it because you are expressing your values and you want to affect change in the country and in the world. We have proven we can get great results. We have proven we can scale extraordinarily well. And we know that we've got a lot of room to grow. And right now, Every single donation is matched up to a total of $100,000. So please make a donation. Click on the link now. It is in the chat. We all know what happens. We all know what happens at the end of these Zooms, right? We close it down and then you're like, oh my God, where did all those links go that were in the chat? So just click on it now and open it up. And finally, thank you. Thank you. In the midst of all of this craziness, it is an extraordinary blessing to be in solidarity with so many amazing activists working together to build political power for the things we believe in. So thank you for being a part of our team. Thank you for supporting our work. And thank you for reaching so many voters last year. I know it's hard to feel good about 2024, but I hope you at least feel good about what all of you did. Thank you, folks. Please feel free to email questions to us at info@environmentalvoter.org if you weren't able to get them all answered. Have a good night.